good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us for Startup Canada's Entrepreneur Town Hall, where parliamentarians and entrepreneurs can share insights and knowledge regarding the changing landscape during COVID-19. Now, we had the pleasure of hosting MP Ruby Sahota last week, and we will continue to host as many sessions and conversations as possible, in addition to our webinar that are geared towards women entrepreneurs. And in fact, I'm proud to announce that we will be hosting MP Gord Johns on April 22nd at 3 p.m. Eastern, and Minister Ng on April 28th at 12:30 Eastern. So please visit startupcan.ca to learn more and register for those events. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Natasha Morano, and I am the Director of Corporate and Government Affairs at Startup Canada. Now, today I'm delighted to host co-chair of the All-Party Entrepreneur Caucus and Member of Parliament for Niagara West, Mr. Dean Allison. Thank you, MP Allison, for participating today and for being such a champion for entrepreneurs in Startup Canada. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on today.
Absolutely. So today, Dean and I will discuss the entrepreneur ecosystem, challenges that entrepreneurs are experiencing during COVID-19, and some of the ways the Government of Canada is actively working to support entrepreneurs and small business. We're also pleased to have received so many questions from you, the audience. So we will try our best to get to as many questions as possible. And we do encourage you to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So if you need any further clarification, just please feel free to pose your questions there. Now, before we begin, I'd like to provide just a little bit of context as to why conversations like the one we're about to have today is so important. Startup Canada is the national rallying community and voice for Canada's 3.5 million entrepreneurs, and COVID-19 has had a profound impact on them. Now, despite these current challenges, Startup Canada is committed to serving Canadian businesses, and part of our response is hosting a series of town halls to gain intel and insight into what is happening across the country. There are so many voices and stories to be told, and today we would like to shine the spotlight on the riding of Niagara West. Now, Dean, we're fortunate to have you participate today, and you certainly offer a unique perspective because not only are you the Member of Parliament for Niagara West, but you're also a small business owner. So in a way, you are experiencing this current situation from two different lenses. So with that being said, why don't we launch right into our first question that I have, and that is, can you provide the viewers, can you provide the audience on a little bit of intel on what it looks like in Niagara West? What are you seeing? What's happening on the ground? And just help us understand the composition of your riding.
Sure. Thank you very much. And once again, Natasha, thanks for what you guys do at Startup Canada. You guys provide a valuable resource for, companies looking to get started and innovation and all that kind of stuff. And so it's always been a pleasure to work with you guys on the Hill over the years. I think the challenge that we have in Niagara West is probably, in my opinion, maybe a little bit more difficult than it is for most places. And let me just explain. We're fairly rural riding in nature. And so we count on like wine country, restaurants, tourism, all those kinds of things are something that we depend on. So we got a bit of a double whammy going on here. I mean, we've got the whole issue of, if you have a restaurant, which we have lots of restaurants and wineries, world class, and I see some of the owners on here now. I noticed that Nicolette Novak on here who's got Good Earth food and wine. Like the challenge for these guys is that, when we start looking at social distancing, we've got a double whammy here. I mean, restaurants in our riding mostly are about experience. You come down here because you want to be in the wine route, you want to eat in the vineyard. That doesn't really work well for takeout and certainly not for drive-through and things like that. And so part of the challenge we have is, we depend a lot on tourism and people coming down to have an experience here in Niagara. And so that's certainly an issue. We're largely agriculture that presents a whole different set of challenges around the food chain and food supply in terms of where we're at. And then I think, if I look at some of the issues we have around non-essential businesses, we have small towns. I mean, I represent the ridings of Grimsby, Lincoln, West Lincoln, Pelham, and then Waynfleet. And if you think about what our main streets look like in these particular areas, there are a lot of small entrepreneurs or people that, mom and pop shops, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that creates a huge challenge of itself based on what's considered essential and not essential. And so Well, I think we've got one of the greatest ridings in the country. We do have a unique set of challenges just because of the fact the way we're laid out and our dependence on food, our agriculture, and then the rural nature, which makes it beautiful to come and visit, but makes it a challenge during this time when there's a lot of non-essential businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I'm not mistaken, skip the dishes is not in your riding, correct?
Well, in some places, I mean, skip the dishes maybe, but because it's so broken up,
Yeah,
I live in a rural part. Skip the dishes is not available for me,
right.
so it's a much smaller concentration. If you think of what people in cities have access to in terms of skip the dishes, it's just a smaller clientele. You look at Beams, where I actually live, and the challenge is if they can use skip the dishes, well, they skip the dishes doesn't necessarily go to Grimsby or some of these other places.
Exactly.
And so I've got a population of 85,000 people that's spread out over a large geographical area. So the
Sure.
reality is that some of those things work, but to a much smaller percent of the population.
So are you seeing some of the smaller, ma and pa shops that maybe normally would be selling, sort of it's a one-stop shop. So they have a little bit of produce. They may have stamps. They may have like one of those sorts of stores where you go and you can gather, all of your essentials. Are you seeing them pivot at all where maybe they're now trying to work with suppliers to be able to sell, the essential items such as milk, eggs, produce? Are you seeing that in some of the smaller towns within your riding, or have those
Yeah, I
stores
mean,
just
and
completely?
the challenges with some of ours, we still have the Sobeys and we still have the Loblaws, those kind of chains, and what have you. But where my real concern is the small mom and pops that are retail, right?
Yeah,
That they sell non-essential stuff. Either they're selling photography or they are a clothing store, et cetera, et cetera. So,
sure.
we definitely have some market type places that are able to still open because they're selling food products. But the challenge still remains that if you're not selling food, as an example, then you probably are being shut out right now, and it makes it tough. I mean, my office is located next to Home Hardware. Well, we know Home Hardware is still considered essential,
Hmm.
but because of the way things have changed now, it's a lineup. Only one person. You can only order
Right.
online. That makes it tough. I mean, look at any restaurant that could do takeout food that's not normally part of what they do. It's a very small pittance of what they could get versus having people be able to come and enjoy the experience. And the same is no different for Home Hardware as it is for any other retailer trying to figure this stuff out.
No, absolutely. And Dean, I think it was last week you had a really robust educational conversation with the MPP for the riding, and really diving into where your constituents can go and gather resources to better understand what they're eligible for, where can they potentially gain support. So what are some of the ways your office is working with your local MPP and making sure that your constituents have up-to-date information and really know where to get those resources to plan their futures?
Sure. And thank you very much. And I'm going to just state right off the fact, I'm a business person and I have talked to a ton of people that actually are saying, listen, we're falling through the cracks. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And so what I'm going to talk about right now, very briefly, is just what is available from the government of Canada. And I have had my staff who's on the call, Phil from Ottawa, who's just posted canada.com, canada.ca, which is the list of COVID-19 responses. Now, listen, guys, ladies and gentlemen on the call, like, I realize this is not an extensive list by any stretch, but these are some of the things that are available to some businesses. And I realize not all is going to qualify, but this is a starting point. We've also got this posted on our website. We posted on social media. Sam has done the same thing. And so when we had the call a couple of weeks ago, we talked about some of those things that are available. And if you don't mind, I'll just, three of the top three things
Please do. Yes,
that I
absolutely.
think are important. One is the wage subsidy. Once again, if you're not open, that's not exactly very helpful. And the wage subsidy was originally supposed to come out at 10%. Ourselves, as in the conservative opposition, but not just us, the CFIB, you guys, there was a number of organizations that reached out to the government and said, you know what, 10% is really not even going to do anything. And so that got raised to 75%. So kudos to the government for listening to that. That is definitely one of the major things that is helpful. Only if you're in business, though. It's not helpful if you're not in business. That's not going to work.
Right.
And the way that works is that if you were down 15% in sales in March, over March, you qualify for this March payroll. The payroll period is March the 15th through April the 11th. And so you take your payroll. It's complicated. And so I'm not going to go over the intricacies of the details, but basically they'll pay up to 75% of your wages. And that is very helpful. Where that is not helpful is if people had subcontractors or contractors on their payroll, right? We've got construction companies, landscaping companies, that doesn't work. Where it's not helpful is for those friends of mine that own restaurants that are not currently open right now. But if you were open and you had sales over last year, then that would be an opportunity as well. The second thing, which is also a very slim window, is those that have payroll between $50,000 and $1 million.
Right.
So if you had payroll last year on your T4 summary between 50 and $1 million, then you can reach out to the bank that you are dealing with, Meridian, TD, RBC, all these places have, and there's a government-backed $40,000, which is interest-free up to the end of 2022. And if you pay it back at that point in time, you get $10,000 free. So that's a no-brainer if you qualify. Once again, if you're a contractor or if you didn't have payroll last year, that's not very helpful. I talk to a number of businesses every day. I talk to chiropractors. I talk to massage therapists, physiotherapists, a number of people that work alone. And I also talk to entrepreneurs that say, well, you know what, Dean, I'm a sole proprietorship and I didn't pay myself on the payroll, so I don't qualify. I paid myself dividends. Well, at least there is the CERB and the CERB, which is what a lot of people are, and I'm getting ahead of myself. That's something for employers that haven't been able to maintain some of their staff in this time. That's up to $2,000 a month. What happened is the government has now said if you paid yourself a dividend of at least $5,000 last year, you can now get it on the CERB. That was something that wasn't there before. And finally, so we have wage subsidies. We've got a potential loan of $40,000, which if you repay it at the end of 2022, you can get $10,000 discounted and keep that. And then the third thing is they've been willing to let you file taxes to remittances, which is GST and some of these things up until the end of August. And so these are things, but you still have to pay them back. And based on what's going on in the economy at the time, will determine whether that's extended or whether that continues or what happens. Those are three of the main things that I think can help some businesses. And once again, it's not going to help everybody.
Sure. And just this morning, the Prime Minister announced the expansion of CERB. So, it'll be interesting to see how many more individuals that will protect and potentially save during this.
And Natasha, it was one of the things that we raised was those people that are on the CRB that have had their hours cut, but maybe you still need people to come in for a few hours.
For sure.
And we push that, and not just us, but other people push this as well. And this is something that's actually helpful. If you think about that, now people can earn up to $1,000. So for some of those people, there may be 10 hours a week. And I talked to, once again, some of our restaurant people that are open on a limited basis. So they don't have enough hours for 40 hours, but maybe some could get the CERB and still earn $1,000. That is very helpful right now. Because then if you paid anything, you were ineligible for that totally. So that's a great step announced today. And once again, I'll give kudos where kudos are due. Good on the government for listening and making that change.
Well, I think at this point, every dollar certainly counts. So it's, very encouraging. It seems that not a lot of Canadians know about the work sharing program. And so I'm hoping maybe you can just spend a few minutes and help the broader community understand how this works, and maybe talk about how this could potentially be leveraged to support individuals in your community.
Sure. So just a couple of things. You're bang on, Natasha. One of the things that people don't really understand or haven't had to deal with is the work sharing program. That's absolutely, it is unknown. And I think where really it applies, it doesn't really apply to seasonal work or where your hours go up and down and stuff like that based on volume. But if you've got some long-term employees that have been working for you for a while, and once again, you can go online to see that. That information is actually in the link that Phil has posted for the web chat around the economic responses to COVID-19. That is an option maybe for individuals that have a number of people that sort of share or could share similar jobs. And what that means is that I see that as being for people that are possibly on salary, right? And they've been working for you for at least a year, and that you're going to need them. And what that could do, the basic is that you can anywhere from 10 to 60% of their job could then be shared. So what it essentially means that for easy math, if they were only going to work 50% of the time, then possibly what they could do is then collect EI for the other 50%. So what that does mean is they're going to have a reduction of pay for sure. That's what's going to happen. But if it means being able to keep people on the payroll, that is one way to make it happen. So if it doesn't make sense for a wage subsidy program because you don't qualify, the work sharing program is definitely an option that people could consider if they're trying to maintain great employees that they want to keep on, and that there's some way that you could share that workload with another group. And you've got to apply online. Once again, it's provided through there, a way for them to be able to figure that out. So you would need to apply, go through the process, but I would suggest for some that maybe some of these other things don't work, that could be an option.
And Dean, are there any concrete examples of where this is working for small businesses or companies in your riding, or is it still sort of too soon to tell?
Too soon to tell because we're fairly early on in this.
Sure.
And people are trying to figure out where their workloads are going to be and what they have for sales. But what they did with the work sharing program is extended it up to almost, I think it was like 76 weeks. So that was something that was only available for what, 30 some odd weeks or whatever. They've now almost doubled the time frame, which I think is great. If you've got a couple employees that you don't want to lay off completely, you don't have enough work for all of them, but you can actually share some of the workload. So time will tell, and I'd certainly be interested in anyone out there that's actually tried it or looked at it and where they found it to be successful. Because if work sharing, if what wage subsidy works, you're probably going to get a better bang for your buck there. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, maybe if you're not eligible for a wage subsidy, that maybe you could be eligible for work sharing.
And if there is anyone on the call or on the webinar today that has had success with this program, please feel free to leave your comments in the Q&A piece, and Dean and I will take a look at it. Dean, let's put a different set of glasses on you now, and let's talk to you as a small business owner. Can you share with us what it looks like for you being a small business owner in your community? What are the sales looking like? What are some of the concerns and pains that you're facing as a small business owner in the riding of Niagara West?
Yeah, thank you. And so, Natasha, before I got involved in politics, I owned a number of restaurants. I owned some Wendy's, some Tim Hortons, some independent bagel shops. I had about 9 restaurants at one time. When I got elected, I sold most of them off. I've got one Wendy's restaurant left in Niagara-on-the-Lake. And where I'm at with that is that, I'm one of the fortunate ones where I've got drive-through service, and we are in a travel center, and so there's still a little bit of takeout. So what basically has happened is that I saw my sales drop from basically the first week in March when things were starting to look not that great, to about 30% to over 50%, and now almost 60%. Now, I'm in a unique position again, where my restaurant is across the highway from the factory outlet mall in Niagara, which is very busy. So obviously retail has been shut down. That is something that we're affected. And I'm in Niagara. There's not a lot of people traveling, as you're probably well aware. And if we look at what's going on with occupancy rates in places like Niagara Falls, we see big 40, 50, 60-story hotels that have got a 5% occupancy rate. So people are encouraged not to be on the road. I get that. That's all part of that. There's a lot of services that are not deemed being essential right now. And so what happens basically at this point in time, my sales are down 50 to 60%. I'm grateful to still have a pickup window that I can use, but not everyone's got that option. If you think about the model of most restaurants down here, it's experiential, as I mentioned before. So it's not easy to just pivot and say, well, we're going to do curbside pickup. I told you why skip the dishes doesn't always work in a situation like that. And I'm going to tell you, most sit-down restaurants I know don't have a drive-through. So that's not even an option, right? So I think as restaurants trying to figure out what they're going to do long-term and how they're going to pivot, this is something that is obviously of great concern for them. And then remember, what all restaurants have, if they don't own their own building, is this thing called rent. And at the end of the day, rent is a fixed cost that doesn't go away. I know I talked to my landlord about landlord reductions, and he's been good so far in the first month, but every landlord's different. And quite frankly, not all landlords are prepared to reduce rent. And so that does create quite an issue, whether you own a restaurant or whether you own a shop on Main Street that you're not allowed to open because you're deemed non-essential. And
Dean, we're finding that a lot of entrepreneurs are experiencing information overload. There's so much information out there. It's just, it's difficult to know where to go, how much time to put into researching one aspect. And for someone that's just started out, it's just a whole other layer to add to the mix. So obviously being a member of Parliament, you're savvy to all of this, but Are you experiencing the same sort of situation where when COVID-19 hit and new programs are being put forward and you're trying to navigate what's best for your employees, what's best for your business, what are some of the issues that you personally had to overcome in those first few weeks as you had to determine how you would pivot?
Well, I think at the end of the day, some businesses need to decide whether they actually can even stay open, even if it's for a short period of time. And obviously, my frontline staff, just like every restaurant person out there, is also important to them, and they are also being exposed, just like our frontline staff, our healthcare are as well, right? These people are on the front lines, whether they're working at a grocery store or whether they're working at a Tim Hortons. These people are on the front lines, and so this becomes a bit of the challenge, number one. But the second thing is like what programs are available. I mean, I've had, as I mentioned to you before, I've had a lot of people reaching out saying, "Listen, Dean, I'm a landscaper. I haven't really been considered essential, so I maybe have a few contracts and things I can do, but at the end of the day, some of my people are subcontract. Like I subcontract some of my things, so I don't qualify for any wage things."
Right.
So that does become a challenge. The other thing I'm finding as well is that as banks continue to look at what's going on, I think access to capital is going to continue to be an issue, right? So where we had programs available before, a lot of the government has rushed to try and create, number one, create liquidity for the banks so that they have issues and they can deal with the paper they have. But the second thing is that now with the government backed $40,000, that's sort of what they're doing today. And so it doesn't make it easier for entrepreneurs during this point in time to actually access capital. I always felt it was always tough for entrepreneurs to access capital to begin with. At this particular time, it makes it even harder.
Absolutely. So Dean, cognizant of time here, I think what I'll do is I'll turn over to a few questions that we have from our audience. And so I'll start here. Here's the first question. We are biz owners with large bricks and mortar showroom, and our monthly rent is approximately $20,000. So we've been talking about rent, $20,000. We cannot sell online as our interiors are customized for our clients. We have been forced to shut down as everyone else. Is there any relief for commercial rents being rolled out? If not, their business will be done by July.
So what I say to that is right now there is nothing in place, but there has been a lot of conversation about some kind of moratorium or trying to figure out what needs to happen in terms of rents. I think it's fair to say that for everyone that has to pay rent, there's someone on the other side that needs to collect rent, right? Because they've got responsibilities and they've got accountabilities with their banks as well. So there has been some conversations because we understand that one of the greatest fixed costs for those that actually can't open their business because it's deemed non-essential right now is rent. I've talked to a number of companies that are saying, like, Dean, we have an entertainment company, so we provide entertainment for people. It's definitely been not deemed non-essential, but our actual office space where we pay rent is we still have to pay the rent. So none of these programs are actually helpful. What I can tell that business person is that the conversations we're having is to try and figure out something for some of these people. Nothing is in place right now, but we continue to push to say we'd like to see some way that we could include some of these people that have been falling through the cracks with some of the other programs that have been offered so far.
And I'm sorry for those of you listening, if you just heard my dog bark. These are the joys, these are the realities of COVID-19, working at home and having a dog bark with the cleaning man in the hall. So I do apologize if people's ears are ringing, and I'm so sorry, Dean, but either we laugh or we cry, and we're gonna laugh right now. So another question that we have here is, how will the government, and we've touched on this a little bit, but how will the government support sole proprietors with no employees who are still working a few hours each week, but at a far reduced capacity? Currently, the support is only for those working 0 hours per week.
So I think that was addressed a little bit today by the government in terms of the CRB, which is good news. And I say once again, I think that one of the things that wasn't originally there was those that paid dividends. They were not eligible for the CRB. They weren't eligible for the wage subsidy. The only way you were eligible for a wage subsidy if you were actually on the payroll prior to March, right? You were actually on the payroll. So one of the things, and I realize it's not a lot of money, but it's still good to see, is that any of those small business people that were getting paid or taking out a dividend, will be able to do that, and will be able to still work a little bit of time, as we've seen today, up to $1,000 a month. I realize even if you're making $1,000, collecting $2,000, people have rent commitments that are considerably more than that. When I talk to my chiropractor friends, and I've talked to a number of chiropractors over the last few weeks, this is not even a drop in the bucket. But this is a starting point, and I think this is something where my heart goes out, and where we need to still push is those people that actually have a small business and they don't take a dividend. They pay everyone else, and then at the end of the day, they take what's left over.
Right.
And they haven't been remitting payroll stuff, and they haven't been paying a dividend. Those people are falling through the cracks. Those are people we're still pushing for to try and find a way to see them be able to get something.
Dean, as COVID-19 continues to develop, and every day really is a different layer and a different piece of the puzzle that we're trying to solve, what advice do you have? And this can either be the advice can either be coming from you being a small business owner or you being the member of parliament for the riding, but what best advice do you have for those that are struggling? What can you do, or what can you say to try to just let the entrepreneurs and the small startups across the country know that, we are in this together? What are some tips that you can potentially provide to them?
Sure, and I think there's a couple things. When I was a member of YEO, Young Entrepreneurs Organization, I used to have a group of individuals that I met with once a month to talk about my business. And this is where I encourage people to get involved with organizations of like-mindedness. And I think that it's important to be able to talk to other business people. And it could be a business coach. I realize we're trying to conserve money when we don't have it. But I can't tell you how invigorating this is to meet with a group of entrepreneurs when times are particularly tough to talk about different ideas. I've got a group of guys that I've been meeting with once a year that I met with 20 years ago when I was in business. And we went on a Zoom call 2-3 weeks ago, and we just talked about whatever each person was doing in the business. And you would be surprised how many ideas I came up with. As a politician, not as a business person, just by these entrepreneurs talking about some of the things they're trying to do. I have one guy in particular who owns a large debt collection company in this country. And one of his things was, he said, the first thing I did was I went to my landlord and I said, I cannot pay you for the next 3 months. You will be made whole, but it's going to be down the road. And at that time, I'm not even sure if I talked to my landlord, and I'm not even sure if those people out there listening to the call have had those conversations with their landlord. But one of the things I realized was that he was being proactive by going to his landlord and saying, listen, I will make you whole, but it's going to have to be down the road. This is not a time that I could be able to do that. And so there was a number of conversations that went something like that. There are a number of business organizations out there that you can look at, you can talk to, you can find mentors on. They're coaching. There's a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't cost a lot. I encourage people to get with like-minded people to have conversations. And if you're in an industry, you need to be a part of a conversation within your industry to find out what other people are doing and what kinds of tips you could pick up yourself as well. I think there's safety in numbers. I think there's encouragement in numbers. Well, we can talk to people. We can show up on a phone call. I met with I've been doing a number of Zoom calls with random groups, people that I normally wouldn't even talk to. And we've sat down and had conversations. They've offered up information and things that we can do as a government better, which I never even considered. I heard about what some of the things they're doing. I talked to a contracting company just this morning, a 7 o'clock Zoom call. And he said, when this whole thing started, we laid off our people for 3 weeks to regroup and figure out what we could do. And then we've come back and we're going to hire back almost all those people 3 weeks later. I said, what a unique idea, because the workload has definitely dropped in terms of where they're at. But it was just unique for me to hear him say, we tried to regroup, we took some downtime to figure it out. And now that we're back, we're doing that thing. So I can't highlight enough how important it is to speak with other entrepreneurs, to be involved with other like-minded groups and like-minded people, and say, hey guys, what are you guys doing? Right? And that could be any number of online forums and all those things to find out what people are actually doing.
You're absolutely right, Dean, and that's why conversations like the one we're having today, conversations that you've had with your provincial counterpart, are of utmost importance, because we are in this together, and the more information that we have out there that we can digest, on our own time, and be able to just share best practices. I mean, there's so many incredible stories that are out there about businesses that have had to pivot, and the bright minds and the talent that we have in this country is just absolutely phenomenal. And so we have to keep, those dreams alive. We Dean and I had a conversation a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about some of the wineries in his riding, and we'll get back to one in particular. But the story about, and I'm going to do a little shout out here to Back 10 Cellars. The spirit of entrepreneurism is so very much alive in the tears, the blood, the sweat that those entrepreneurs put in and dove into with their winery. I think that we have to really live and breathe what entrepreneurship is all about right now to be able to get through it. So we'll switch to a few more questions here, and actually this is a perfect segue. Dean, do you know if there's going to be, or if you heard anything about any aid that will be available for startups who are either pre-revenue or pre-launch? Is there anything that can be done to support the little guys in all of this?
Yeah, and unfortunately right now, it's really trying to save the economy. And I believe that hopefully down the road, there'll be something there for startups and entrepreneurs. The government has gone full in on trying to maintain people having some wages and be able to look at, having people stay at work, et cetera, et cetera. So at this point, there's not a whole lot, because basically it's been all hands on deck to try and salvage what's going on. But we know at the end of the day, it's going to be entrepreneurs and people that hire people and people that employ people that is going to be how we get out of this thing. So.
Absolutely. So next question that we have from an audience member is, what can be done for businesses that don't qualify for financial subsidiaries?
Well, like as I said, once again, this is one of the biggest challenges. I think that you continue to reach out to legislators like myself, MPPs, and then what we do is we continue to push these ideas up the food chain, if you will, or to the government. One of the things that came to us before is people were saying, "Listen, I collect HST. I spend all kinds of it." I think in my particular business, we remit to the government with $10,000 a month of HST. And one of the ideas came to us is, why don't, while we're waiting on all these things, why don't you make that money available to us? Mm-hmm. Because we paid into that system. Why not make that money available to us? And so it's one of the things we've been suggesting to the Liberals, that in government, that if there would be ways to get money for people now, immediately, right away. One of the other things that we talked to them about that came forward was people say, well, what will I qualify for a wage subsidy? And so we also were trying to get them on the front end to let businesses know if that's actually something they qualify for as well. So there are a number of these initiatives we continue to push up to the government so that they can continue to make it more things available and consider other options that maybe they didn't consider at once.
And this is just an interjection here, but maybe you can help us understand what's going on behind the scenes. So it's amazing that every day we're hearing from the elected government officials and the ministers in charge of really making sure that these policies are put in place. But what's going on behind the scenes with all of the members of parliament from across the country? Are caucus meetings still happening? What is going on that maybe the general public just don't know, what's happening behind the scenes?
Well, a couple of things are going on. First of all, we're fielding thousands of emails every day. And from that, I'm trying to, get on the phone and return calls. I see a couple of people on the list here, phone calls I actually owe to. JD, you'll get your call later on today. I promise you that. So we're just going through the list and doing that stuff. So, and then what happens in opposition, and the Liberals are doing exactly the same thing. Yesterday, I had an Ontario caucus call. And we had conversations about what we're hearing on the ground to all of Ontario to say, listen, these are things we need to raise at National Caucus. I had a National Caucus meeting earlier today on Zoom as well, where we continue to push these ideas. We've got industry caucus. We've got I was on a tourism caucus call yesterday where we actually talked about some of the issues around what's going on here, around rents. and around tourism and getting back to work and all these other kinds of, and reopening the economy and things like that. So we are hearing from people on the ground, people in the community. We pass that back up, and then we push these issues with the government and say, these are things that we need to consider, and these are things that we need to move on. And so these are how we get these information sessions to people. It starts at a grassroots level by being able to reach out through an email or phone call, and we push it up through our various provincial and then federal, and we then move to the government and say, these are some things we'd like to see happen. The other way it happens as well is through other outside organizations. We've got chambers. We've got chambers of commerce represented here, where people will call into the chamber. Startup Canada, we'll do that, the CFIB. There's a ton of organizations that have memberships that are reaching out to their memberships saying, what are important issues that we need to go to the government on and encourage them to do more on.
And I mean, Dean, your riding, along with a couple other ridings that in your general vicinity in the province, I mean, tourism is such an economic driver. So it's, on one hand, I'm sure that it's really that fine line between, you know, making sure that people's safety is of utmost importance, but also coming up with the backup plan and coming up with a contingency plan for when this is behind us. How do we, you know, kickstart our economy again? How do we ensure that people still want to go to Niagara West and go visit I think you had said that there's over 50 wineries in your riding. I mean, this is the time when people start planning their trips to go to Niagara to enjoy all of these wonderful opportunities that Niagara West offers. So it's, I'm sure it's very difficult for individuals listening to have that balance between, you know, preparing for the now, or dealing with the now, but preparing for the future. And how do we get through this moving forward? Another question we have here, and we alluded to it a little bit, but what can the government of Canada do to encourage shorter, more local supply chains?
Well, I think they're already doing it. I'm going to say I've been very impressed with what a number of the premiers have been doing, Doug Ford in particular, who said, listen, you know, the fact remains that we don't, you know, Ontario is a great manufacturing center. And yet over the years, it's been eroded because it's, you know, either we haven't been competitive enough or we've gone to places like China. I think this is a great opportunity to revisit our manufacturers, the great job they do. We'll post, I know one of the questions you had coming up is the fact that how do we get involved? Like, you know, how do we do these things? We'll post something shortly. There's a great website that the government of Ontario and the government of Canada have done to say when it comes to COVID-19 and personal safety equipment, PPE. If you guys could do that, I got a bunch of wineries, distilleries, breweries in the riding. Dillon's comes to mind. They were featured on CBC just recently. And what happened was there was a number of wineries that had some vodka and some high alcohol that they would use to mix in some of their wines and some of the drinks. And they went over to places like Dillon and said, we'll help you out. Dillon's, which already produces spirits, said we're going to provide some hand sanitizer. And so there you go. There's a great example of a local business, Dillon's, who decided, you know, well, here's what we're going to do. We see there's a shortage of hand sanitizer. Let's take some of the products that we're using, we'll use and convert that alcohol to a high alcohol hand sanitizer, and we'll go from there. And when they saw that, and then the story went out on CBC News, then a bunch of wineries reached out and said, we got some product. We want to be a part of it too. We want to come over. And it's amazing the ingenuity of entrepreneurship. And I'm always impressed with entrepreneurs because this is the kind of things that happen. And then I've got another company, it's the Moyer family, that do Moyer. They've had over 100 years of farms here in Lincoln, and they've got a machine that actually gets rid of COVID. It's actually right now one of these machines that it's been used in the fruit industry to actually disinfect and sanitize fruit, and it's non-invasive. And now they're in conversations with the federal government on ways they can move their product forward. So there's a ton of innovative ideas that were being used for something else that have now pivoted as a result of that. And that to me is just entrepreneurship, trying to fill a demand and fill a need.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's entrepreneurship 101. I mean, these are the stories that I think are really going to get us through these times of need. So another question that's come through here is, do you think that the virus will limit the amount of time the house sits in the future?
So I think what's going to happen, I got to assure you that of my 121 colleagues, we're all chomping at the bit to go back. Like we want to go back, but we also get the fact that things are a little bit different right now. So there are discussions ongoing. We are supposed to go back. We had an emergency sitting on Saturday, and what ended up happening was there were only 20 people in the house.
Mm-hmm.
So there's only 5 people from Ontario, from the Conservatives that were there. Most of them were from the greater Ottawa area or living in the Ottawa area. There was a few that commuted in. We are supposed to be back in the house on Monday, this Monday, and
Yep.
right now I know discussions are underway to try and figure out what's going on. I know there's some conversation about meeting virtually around meetings and stuff. One of the things as an opposition that we are very concerned about, we think it's important, is that while the government is coming up with plans and processes, there needs to be accountability and scrutiny of if these plans are getting to who they need to, if these are actually demonstrating, if it's around PPE, if it's around money to people falling through the cracks. And so as an opposition, we want to be there and we want to have the opportunity to do that. So I sense they'll try and figure out a way to do this. So social distancing is definitely in consideration, number one. Mm-hmm. But number two, we need to be there to monitor, to encourage, to give ideas that can help with the programs that are ongoing right now, or the government is coming up with on a daily, weekly basis, and they're tweaking as they go, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure. So we have a question here from an entrepreneur that says, they ask, who should I approach if I have an innovative idea or product ready related to COVID-19?
So I just, my staff, Phil from Ottawa, just posted in the dialogue box. There's a great website, Buy and Sell. And he also posted the provincial one. So we got 2 initiatives going on right now, provincially, and every province has got this going on. So the government of Ontario does, as well as the federal government. It's a pretty good website to indicate what's going on. And likewise, we'll also make sure, Natasha, that you have that information. So if people don't get it out of the box here, we'll have it posted on our website. We'll send it to you so that you can send that out in an email to all the people that are subscribed today. So I think that's one of the things that the government's done a good job on, is making the needs known and figuring out a way that entrepreneurs can have to contribute to that. So we have had a number of businesses reaching out to us, and we sent them to these websites to see how they could participate.
Thank you, Dean. And yes, just to recap on what Dean has said, we will ensure that for all of you participating today or that have signed up, that you have all of these links and resources in your inbox first thing tomorrow. Another question that's come through here is, I understand that a layoff of employees expires after 13 weeks. Then it is considered a final termination, and as an employer, I am required to pay severance and termination pay. I own a restaurant and could be closed beyond the 13 weeks, June 15th specifically, allowed for a layoff. If I open before the 13-week layoff with social distancing, I won't be able to bring back all of my staff at once, and the staff will still be laid off and it will go beyond the 13 weeks. What am I to do? Will there be any relief for me beyond the 13 weeks?
Yeah, so I would just tell that business owner that we'll just wait and see what is going on. What's happened is this thing is changing on a daily basis as we find out more about the actual disease and the virus, as we figure out what is going to be acceptable as we move forward. These things will need to happen. The reason I use that example is that if you look at the work-share program, that was originally 30 some odd weeks. It's now been pushed to 70 some odd weeks. That's a good example of trying to anticipate what's going to happen down the road. And so if you look at even what the CERB is, right now, that is only available for 3 months, and you've got to reapply every month. So I think we need to wait and see where we're going to be in June. As I said, that one website that we said, canada.ca, that's got a number of the initiatives, that's where we get all our information from. So we'll watch the Prime Minister at 11 o'clock, we'll watch the ministers in the afternoon, but then every evening we'll go to that Canada website. We don't get, as a member of Parliament, I don't get any different or advanced briefings this is what we get, and this which is on the website. So I would encourage everyone on the site to check back that website on a regular basis. And then I would also ask people if they need more clarification to one, reach out to our office, or B, reach out to Sam's office if it's a provincial issue. And then the third thing is for those of you that have accountants, I know for example, my accountant has been sending out a recap every night of what some of the legislation means around the wage subsidy, et cetera. And so I'll call him up and say, okay, Ron, I actually saw what the news release was. I've read it. I've read what you're saying. Is this exactly what I think it is? And so I think it's always good to consult with a professional just to make sure, because from what I understand, the wage subsidy is not as simple as saying my payroll is 20,000. And so guess what? 15,000. It has something to do with what they worked before, what they're working now, all that kind of stuff. So it's always good to have somebody help you with clarify what some of these things look like.
Exactly. So we have a question here. Is there any relief to the small business owner who is contributing to HST but is not on payroll and is using their own personal savings to keep the business going? Is there any relief for them, beyond what we've already discussed? Can you think
No, not at this point in time. And this is one of the things that we're encouraging the government to consider. There is certainly a number of small business people that fall through the cracks. They're either too small to be on the payroll themselves. As I mentioned before, I've talked to a number of these people, and they say, you know what, Dean, we pay all our suppliers, we pay our rent, and then what's ever left over, we take at the end of the day or at the end of the year. And so I totally understand that. And so we're reaching out to the government saying there are a number of people. We've also got a number of people that decided to start businesses this year, and they don't fit through any program as well. And so we're going to continue to encourage the government to look for ways to encourage those in businesses, because quite frankly, we need businesses to be strong. We need them to come out strong after this, because they do employ people and they do help contribute to the greater economy.
You mentioned the beautiful success story of how Dillon's completely pivoted and now is directly, ensuring that the safety of probably not only your constituents, but a wider base have access to the hand sanitizer. Are there any other, success stories that you're hearing in your riding that people that are listening in on can really, lean into, to know that there is an opportunity to still breed innovations, to still be, positive in all of this?
Sure. I did mention the other story fairly quickly. A food company that sanitizes food products that has actually pivoted quite nicely. And they're in discussion with a number of organizations. They feel that they can actually take masks and be able to sanitize them at COVID-19 satisfaction, so they can sanitize them. So it's not a fluid, it's not a solution, so it's not invasive as far as that goes. So they're in talks with a number of companies right now, and organizations and government agencies, trying to figure out how they can take a product which is designed for the food industry and actually make sure that that is able to apply to a wide range of health. And you think about that, if we could sanitize a mask in a way that was appropriate, what that could do in terms of being able to save on PPE equipment. And so these are the conversations we're having right now. Huge. I'm very proud of these guys, because they've been farmers for over 100 years in the community. This is a product they developed a number of years ago, and now they're pivoting right now as it relates to health and safety and the healthcare of our workers. So I'm very excited to see some of the things that they're working on now, and hoping that they all come to fruition.
Absolutely. And please keep us abreast of what's the innovation that's happening in your riding. And we'd love to just, continue in and listen to determine if that product is able to gain some traction. So we're nearing the end of our discussion. It's crazy how fast this time has gone. But I feel that I would be remiss if I didn't mention the wineries in your riding, over 50 of them. So besides Dillon's being the distillery, what are some innovative ways that local wineries are still selling their product?
So, and everyone does something a little bit different. I mean, there's a number of wineries, and I just take a couple of examples here. And so there's a couple of restaurants. One I know in particular, it's located in Vineland, and what they're doing, for example, is they're open for curbside. This is a sit-down restaurant that probably wouldn't have a ton of ability to do a whole lot with an Uber Eats or or skip the dishes, those kinds of things. They've restricted their hours to just they used to be open at noon and open until later. They restricted their hours in the evening. They've come up with an app online to order food, so they know exactly what's going on. You know, some do, some don't. And what they're also providing, they're providing a limited amount of wines on their menu from local wineries at the same price you could pick them up from the winery. So think about that. So, you know, normally a markup on a bottle of wine can be anywhere from 100 to 200%, you know, maybe more depending on where you're at. So right now at this particular restaurant, you can go in there, you can order some food, and you can pick up, once again, it's a limited menu as well as a limited wine, and do that. Wineries have always done, some of them are doing curbside pickup, so you can call ahead, you can drive to the winery, you do that. Many of them deliver, many of them will deliver for you. And then there's still those that obviously have SKUs with the LCBO. One of the unique things that will come into Niagara is that you get a chance to try a whole bunch of different wine that just doesn't make it to the LCBO. Right. And so those are a few things that they're doing. And I think, you know, I've seen owners dropping cases of wine off for people as well. So there's a whole bunch of things that go on. And certainly with delivery, I mean, there's a lot of wineries in our riding that have wine club. These are wineries that have, you know, dropped off a couple bottles a month to, you know, 6 bottles to every 6 months, that kind of stuff. There's a real opportunity, and certainly one that's important that they continue to push, is how do they sign people up for wine clubs? How do they get people to, you know, automatically renew every month? And so these things are ongoing, and something that I think that they'll continue to push more of. There's a whole bunch of events that we have coming up, that we had coming up, that are obviously been canceled. That is very disappointing to see. And obviously part of the business is being able to come out here, taste the wines for yourself, and then determine what you want to do. So I know there's a number of things these wineries are trying to do. Those are just 2 or 3 examples I'm giving you right now, where they actually are dropping things off. And that's kind of nice to see, where I could call a winery and they would ship to me directly. So those are good things to see.
Can you send some to Ottawa?
Yeah, we need to send some to Ottawa. So.
We sure do. So we have time for one last question. Is there support coming, or have you heard of any chatter regarding support for farmers?
So that's one of the things that I've heard a lot about through AgriCorp. You know, that's a pathetic answer from a politician to say, listen, but there is AgriCorp that's there that is looking at trying to figure that. There are some of the stability programs we've got to figure out. We're having a large issue on a number of fronts. First of all, there's 2 fronts. One's a temporary foreign worker issue, where we're trying to get those people in that help some existing farmers that have used them. They're coming in drips and drabs, and that's something that's important. We're going to continue to deal with. But we're having a hard time with ornamentals right now. Because of garden centers being closed, we've got a number of greenhouses that, quite frankly, have left a lot of product, or they've grown it and they have no way to distribute it. And that's one of the things that we'll continue to push the provincial government on. That list of essential and non-essential businesses is so important. And right now, there's not enough supports for farmers, in my opinion, and more that we need to continue to raise the issue on. So right now, it goes through current programs that are listed through AgriCorp and some of these other farm programs, agri-stability, and there's a whole bunch of these programs that farmers are. I don't think that's a good enough answer right now, Natasha. I'm not happy with that answer. There's more that we need to do to help farmers out for sure.
No, well, we so appreciate your transparency, and this is something that, you know, every hour it's continuously evolving. And so if we learn of anything that becomes available, we'll make sure that is circulated out. Dean, I want to thank you so very much on behalf of Startup Canada for taking time out of your schedule to speak with us, to speak with your constituents, to speak with the broader startup community. I guess my final question that I'll pose to you to have you sort of wrap things up is, what advice do you have for the entrepreneurship community and for entrepreneurs out there listening?
I would say a couple of things. First of all, I mean, do your best to stay positive. This is a tough time, and I find that when fear creeps in, and there's a lot of fear, trust me, every day there's fear, that shuts down our ability to try and pivot or try and think of other things. I think that, you know, by trying to remain optimistic, that's when your ideas come. I would also suggest that you try and get together with like-minded people, even through Zoom or through associations, through chambers and stuff like that. This is so important because it's through like-minded conversations that we get ideas that we think of, oh my goodness, I never thought about that before. And then I think the other thing is continue to reach out to members of parliament and members of provincial parliament. We've got to get this economy going at some point in time. I know it's a very sensitive subject right now, and I don't want to be in trouble or offside because I've encouraged people to say we got to get going, but we've got to get people back to work. It's so important. We need to deal with the issues around social distancing and our seniors and those most vulnerable. By far, we've got to do those things as well. But we've got to get people back to work because I think this cannot go on forever and ever. Businesses are going to close up. Businesses are going to be able to do that. So I would encourage people to do the best they can to stay positive, number one. And number two, reach out to like-minded individuals, either through associations or through business organizations and groups where you guys can have conversations on a regular basis. Find out what other people are doing. Find out what best practices are, and then make sure you share that. Sam and I will be doing another one of these calls next Friday.
Okay.
And so we'll be having these conversations again because it's time again to update people with what's gone on, to hear people's concerns once again, and continue to raise the bar and continue to push on behalf of people that are involved in small businesses.
Well, again, thank you so very much, Dean, for everything that you're doing, not only for the constituents of Niagara West, but for the country as a whole. We welcome you back to the Startup Canada platform at any time. And hopefully we'll be seeing you in Ottawa in the not too distant future. To all of you joining us today, thank you so very much. We will be following up with all of the links that have been shared throughout the session. And if you have any questions at all, please feel free to reach out to us at Startup Canada. And again, next week we're hosting MP Gord Johns. The following week we're hosting Minister Ng. We will keep these conversations going. We will do our best to educate the startup community on the resources that are there. And I hope that everyone has a positive and uplifting and healthy day.
Thanks for hosting, Dasha.
Thank you very much.
Okay, have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.